Otro veterano. See, another one with gray hair and wrinkles. An expansive girth. Estamos chulos todavía, porque si así believe mommy. And you gotta believe mommies, you know. The conversation this morning, and I'll try to keep it at 20 minutes, I believe you said, is about ideology. You know, the ideas that we have worked with, and ideas are very powerful because those are the stuff of leadership. Ideas is what gets into someone's head, particularly those who can see a little bit more than some of us, and they have a little vision, and then they make it a cause. They believe it so much, so fundamentally, this idea, and that they're the ones to carry it forth because they can see it. And they begin to feel it, so it becomes a cause, it becomes a mission. And then they start working on how to go about making that real. And that, in a short phrase, sums up the three most important questions that there are in life. And we've already been through two of those questions, and you have found answers to those questions already. That's why you're here. And we haven't yet completely found the answer to the third question. So what is that? Well, the first question that we try to figure out, and we do early on, is how does the world work? And we figure that out usually with the family and the neighborhood and the schoolyard and, you know, down the street and the barrio and so on. And we were able to get out of high school pretty much understanding how the world works. And then, of course, you know that many of your high school chums are here. So that's all they ever learned, is how it works. Those of you that are here are working on that second question, and the gray hairs and the wrinkles, we already pretty much got it down pat. That's why we're still here. Because the second question is, how do you make the world work for you? And if it's cushy, you stay there. It's called retirement. It's called a pension plan, fringe benefits, minimum wages, maternity leave, these kinds of things, sabbaticals, fellowships, assistantships, all these kinds of things is how you begin learning to make the world work for you. Again, regrettably, this is about as far as we're going to get because we get comfortable. And if it takes us a long time, like many of us with the gray hair and the wrinkles, we get mortgages and start worrying about the pension and retirement and grandchildren and life insurance and diabetes and all these things. So that we kind of just stay there because it's working fine for me. The last question, how do we remake the world? That's a tough one. And that's where we get into a very small percentage of the population, of any population. And it's all those people that have that vision, that have that gut feeling, and know the hell of me, because they got to do it. These are the doers. These are the people that go out and try to make that world fit better, so that it wears better, and that you're comfortable. Because that's the goal of all of us, either in a private, personal endeavor, as well as in a collective effort as a group, or even as a nation state, which is the current concept. Nations start to fulfill what they think is their destiny. Now, this idea of a nation state doesn't have much time here to flesh out, but you do know by looking at any map, because they're color-coded and they got lines. Those are, you know, the borders, and those are the markings, the way to tell you who belongs there and who doesn't. And all those nation states have always had a big problem, and that is if they overran their borders to incorporate larger territory, they either got rid of the people that were there before them, genocide, or they ran them off if they couldn't kill them all. And then they established their boundary. And then the problem begins of how do you incorporate these people into that culture, including the politics. And that's where you have the clash of all these isms, these ideologies, these visions. Because the group that has been captured, or the group that has been held hostage, the ones who didn't get killed off, have this funny way of regenerating. They keep coming back. And that is particularly our story meaning those of us who have an ancestry of Mexicanness, as well as all the other cultural cousins who have a similar story, but ours is quite unique because we are a dismembered. You know, we don't have our original homeland the way it was. Others, cultural cousins, do have a place, and they have chosen for one reason or another, or being pushed to come, to question of where do we belong? And so we always deal with this issue of identity. And again, ideology, the isms creep in. You know, and invariably, just like that speaker that you have heard, and we'll hear again about you being the future, you've also heard those speakers that usually start off, as I didn't, good morning, Chicanas, and Chicanos, and Latinos, and Hispanics, and Mexican Americans, and Latin Americans, and Americans, or whatever you want to call yourselves. How many times have you heard that? Well, that captures it also there, that we really have a problem here in terms of identity and how to form a group. How do we begin working on a common foundation among all these isms that exist? And you know, at the very beginning, which is many years back, we had several diasporas where we got either killed or pushed away. Beginning where I just left from this morning in Texas was the first one. You know, by 1836, pretty much all the Mexicans had been run out. The few loyalists who unfortunately picked the wrong side ended up being run out about a decade later. We just celebrated that here a couple of days ago, la Independencia de the Republic of Texas. And those people thought that even this part where we're standing today was part of that, until they came up here trying to incorporate that into Texas, and New Mexicans actually didn't agree. So Sorreñaditos, they went back and they finally just stayed around the Las Cruces area. Many still call it Little Texas here in Mexico. And then about a decade later, you know, we had that repeat scenario, the second diaspora, the invasion of Mexico. And that was pretty final. By 1848, a larger landmass was taken, and the problem began. Estimates vary that some 80,000 to 100,000 of our ancestors of that type remained. The others were either killed or run off. And it wasn't until we get to the Mexican Revolution around 1910 or so, to about 1930, that we have approximately 1 million persons then coming back into what once was Mexico and now occupied Mexico, which we call the Southwest, and settled there waiting for the revolution to end. And unfortunately, that group met up with the ones who did stay and the ones who were still fighting the war. Now, those were the original irredentists. You know, irredenta is a word from way back when. And if you've ever been down to the Plaza Untitled Mariachis in Mexico City, Garibaldi, that's how you can remember this. It's named after the fellow who thought of making one Italy. Italy was broken up in a Greek fashion with the free city states. And that's how many Greeks and Romans also controlled the Italianos by giving them democracy and giving them representative democracy and bringing self-government in these small units. Were able to manage this large landmass called Italy today, until Garibaldi came along and decided they didn't need that. That they still fundamentally were all Italianos and they wanted one Italy. So when he succeeded in putting all that together, he was promoted to general and made a big hero. And the Mexicans, in honor of that particular hero, put it there, that plaza and that great place. Unfortunately, we celebrate the mariachi music and not the idea of irredenta, of putting back together one Mexico. So that began then, but people forgot about it. And of course, as you know, there were many skirmishes that continued into the 1900s throughout. And even here in New Mexico, you have illustrious history here, Gorras Blancas and many others who continued fighting for those issues all the way up to, most recently, Reyes Lopez Tijerina, and trying to do the same thing about a land recovery movement. And that's in the 1960s, 67, 68. And that celebration is coming up in June 5th pretty soon. And there's others since then who have tried to do things with water rights and grazing rights and fighting against the government with the Forest Service. Because if you look at a map, a U.S. map, you will see that west of the Mississippi, about 2/3 of the land, 2/3 of the land is still in the hands of state and federal government. That is our ancestral land. So that is still up for grabs. That's still in stewardship, and they're just having it in savings. And this state, like many other states in the West, including Texas, we have 22 million acres of land in that reserve, our ancestral land. And that pays for higher ed so Anglos can go to school. Not us. That's what subsidizes at the very bottom the foundation programs for higher education in most of these states in the West. It's our land and the benefits, the derivative benefits of our land. Well, we don't like to talk about that because that kind of was what got us into trouble, trying to defend the land to begin with. So a group emerged back then saying, you know, we really shouldn't have to fight these wars over again. And every time we do fight, we do lose. Maybe it's better to just go along. And that's a very important maxim in politics. You know, you go along to get along. And many, many books have been written about that principle of working with others and blending in and assimilating. So we have the first modern day organization modeled after Anglo organizations. The League of United Latin American Citizens, created back when, around 1927, 29. There's some debate there, but it doesn't matter. 2 years with Harlingen, Corpus Christi in Texas. It doesn't matter. It got established, and it is the largest, oldest organization. And they truly believe that if they became white-like, Anglo-like, that problems would disappear. Just as a comparative note, this is the same kind of thinking behind the founding of the Niagara movement and institutionalized it into the NAACP. The African Americans then thought that if the Anglos were only become aware of them and only had an opportunity to make friends with them, that their racism would go away and they would understand that they just came in black, but that really were just like them. And that was the beginning ideas, that if you adopted those ways and assimilated, that you could become part of the body politic. And this political incorporation of groups is a perennial problem. This country has had its share of those difficulties, as well as many other countries around the world. India, for example, or currently 2 times now, the former Soviet Union creating the Soviet Union, and now the dismantling of that, you have that resurgence of nationalism and ethnic nationalities coming and reclaiming another old land and saying this is where we belong, we've always belonged. So we have this problem always of fighting, of how much to give up of our being in order to fit in and be like those that are dominant and in the majority. And it does work for some people. You know, assimilation is not about group ascendancy. It is about an individual path to becoming less Mexican and more Anglo, to the point that you can be mistaken, or putting it crudely, that you can pass for white. Now, you've got to have certain phenotypical attributes. I mean, it's pretty hard for some folks to try to pass it off, regardless of whether the hair comes out orange and you've got purple contact lenses. They never come out real blue. Have you noticed? It's a funny looking color of eyes that some people come up with. It's very difficult to assimilate for another reason. And that is, it's almost like a two-way street. It isn't a one-way thoroughfare. You know, you just can't say, I want to assimilate. Somebody at the other end says, we want you to assimilate. You know, there's got to be an exchange of abrazos there. You know? Una mano no se lava sola. You've got to have another partner there to work it together. And that willingness and that spirit hasn't been there. Part of that is because of our history. You know, we are a territorial minority, and if you look around, you see that those people who have a land base or a land claim always are very difficult to incorporate in any nation state by the majority who don't have that land claim. So this is part of our problem in terms of why there isn't that reception as there has been for others. And phenotypically, you know, we do look a little different, and we act a lot different. Our values and our orientations and our visions are somewhat different. And it has a little going around and around the circles. Sometimes those first groups that come, like those million that came right after the Mexican Revolution, they had a lema, they had a slogan, they had a saying. You know, we're going to go back to Mexico mañana, because that's truly what they thought. They only came temporarily until the revolution would end, and it didn't. It took about 20 years for that formal violence to subside, and you have then the beginning of the modern stable dictatorship that we have in Mexico, and the birth of the PRI, and their hegemony for about 80 some odd years now. So that it was very difficult for the children born of that group who want to stay here, because their parents said they're going to go back. Nevertheless, this group of LULACers, the people with LULAC, they decided that they were going to stay. And that they were going to try to blend in and be accommodated and fit in. And they had a terrible time. You know, that was the era where we had the mass lynchings and murders and brutality throughout the Southwest. To finish up the agenda, we had segregation. We had the destruction of our institutions. You have the stories here with Archbishop Lamy and others that followed. You know, we were completely segregated and still are. And I don't know how many of you are Católicos, and I don't mean to offend you in any particular way. Just simply point out that we still have the most segregated moments on Sundays when we go to the Spanish-speaking Mass and the Mexican church and so on. That still goes on today. That's the legacy still from that period of time. I'm sure that you have segregated cemeteries still in Mexico in certain parts, like we do in Texas and other places. So that legacy is still there. Those symbols are still there of the time when we were a people apart. Well, it still works for some people that assimilates, but for individuals, not for the group. And the reason it doesn't work, or any other strategy doesn't work, is because there cannot be group ascendancy because there's already a group there. It's just very simple. Number one, even though they might say, we want you to be like us, we want you to be number one, they don't really mean it because they don't want you to take their place. It's just quite obvious. So you got to settle for second place, or 1A, 1B, almost like one, but not completely. So along came another group after they realized that this was not going to be completely a full strategy to be politically incorporated, and that's the American GI Forum. Now they too followed Anglo models of organization. I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. But the American GI Forum, you know the story, I'm sure. Here was a returning veteran, a young man, Felix Longoria, who was brought back to Texas as a war casualty. In Three Rivers, Texas had a policy where they didn't hold wakes in funeral homes, much less bury Mexicans in the white cemetery. So they refused service. And a young physician who had just come back from the war himself, Hector Garcia, decided that this was intolerable. This was just un-American. And he really believed in the American creed, equality and fairness and no discrimination for people, particularly those who had gone to give their life, to put their life on the line, like Garcia had, and like unfortunately Longoria had. So he took it upon himself to launch this crusade, not only to bury Felix Longoria, and he was ultimately buried, but at the Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, where he still is today. Hadn't been able to be brought back to Three Rivers, Texas. It's still a very volatile issue to be brought up. But not only did he accomplish that, he also accomplished organizing veterans. That says a hell of a statement, no? That in order for us to benefit, in order for us to derive, in order for us to have standing, to claim any kind of civil right or any kind of benefit in the American society, we must not only put our life on the line by being in the military, but also be willing to die for the possibility that maybe we might get something. We know we won't get buried in Three Rivers, but we'll get buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Well, that movement also proliferated, and that is the second major and largest organization that began, but it was limited to, as I pointed out, the reach of how Anglo organizations come about. Let me deal with that for a moment. Yeah. I don't know why, other than that we want to be just like them and want to take successful models from their life experience to fit ours. But you know that when we have organizations, we collect dues. That's the most inefficient way of funding a cause, a movement, much less a revolution. We have rotating leadership. We will let you run for president this time, and then if she brings more members than you next time because they pay dues, she'll win, and she'll be the president. And we have some ridiculous rules. For example, the National LULAC organization has annual conventions. Their term of office now has been extended for a whole 2 years. You can't even find the bank account, to change the treasurer's name, much less the records for transition to occur between one administration and the other. It's ridiculous for that to fit to us, but we've made it fit, and it doesn't work. And like other groups, we have conventions and meetings in these big expensive hotels that few of us can go. The only ones that can go are the ones who are paid to go. Well, that knocks out your membership if you were going to bring them. Or you bring them just to the tail end when the vote's going to happen and you don't stay there. You stay down at the 8 to a room at the Super 6 hotel. And then you bring your Popeye's chicken. Cold biscuits and cold chicken in the morning. There's just no way for us to be able to function. And when we really get at it, the militant will pass a resolution. And we'll send it to say, we will never have this again. No más. Ya basta. All these fancy words condemning whatever. And before we conclude, we'll invite an Anglo politician and give him a plaque for distinguished service to our community. And usually that speech consists of telling us what we already know, what our problems are, and why we don't do something about it, as if we could. That example, that model has been used over and over again, and it just doesn't seem to work. And then in the Constitution, because we must have a Constitution bylaws. Even on this campus, if you're going to register an organization, you've got to have a Constitution, you've got sponsors, all of this stuff, and they got to approve it. Well, those early organizations didn't allow women full membership. And that's just ridiculous. Since then and today, the majority of our population has been female. So how do you cut off more than half of your body and say you can't belong? Only recently have they been given full membership, and only recently, at least in LULAC, we've had the first and only national president who's female, Belen Robles. But we have a few state leaders that are female. That hasn't happened in the American GI Forum yet. I guess we have no real old veteranas, with a lot of medals yet in the American GI Forum. But that'll happen because the old guys are dying. Women last longer. That'll happen. Now, they also said in their constitution that they would only take citizens. Right? We've always had, then we had more, today we have more. In the Middle years, that's when we grew up, and all of us were basically U.S. citizens. From 86 forward, 1986 forward, in many places there's more Mexicanos that are born in Mexico than there are Chicanos in that area. So we've got a regeneration here of groups, just like back then, when that million that came were all Mexicanos, foreign born. So we were back to those conditions again, and those organizations said if you weren't a citizen, you couldn't join. Well, not only they cut off half the women, now they cut off the other half. Trying to make things happen in the United States, and it was very impossible with those things. And they also said that you weren't a real man until you got to be 21. Más triste también. So, you have to be 21 years of age to be able to vote and be counted and be heard back when. Well, they also said in their constitutions that they were not going to be political. Now, we may look back as I'm being somewhat caustic about this, but we just don't understand why they had to say it. It was very dangerous to be Mexican, much less political. I mean, that was sure death. So I understand why they had to put that down. But they didn't have to believe it. But they did. And it isn't until we get to the 1960s with the Viva Kennedy Club that we get past assimilation and LULAC. And then GI Forum trying to integrate. They didn't really want to become white-like. They just wanted to get benefits, housing, education, jobs. And by that time, Roosevelt had integrated the defense industries, and Truman had also integrated the military. And we began, as other groups who were excluded previously, to build a middle class and to be able to have some government jobs and some pensions and things of that sort. So, in the 1960s, these Viva Kennedy clubs, Kennedy was a figure and a symbol that was very important to our community, including Mrs. Kennedy, because she was the one that hablaba español, and she did often in campaign stops and things, and that endeared our community to her and the Kennedys because they were also Católicos. And Kennedy personified as close as you could get to being one of us. So, unlike prior presidential campaigns, when this was over with, as in all campaigns, you know what happens. We put all the records in a cardboard box and somebody takes it home, and whoever didn't drink as much remembers where they are. And that's where they stay. Win or lose. You still drink too much, win or lose. And that's where they stay. Well, not this time. Not this time, after the Viva Kennedy Club. What they did was they took that card file, they took those records, and they said, you know, we got to organize ourselves into a political organization. I remember the first one is called League of United Latin American Citizens. There's nothing Mexican about that. And the next one, American Chef Forum. That's like spaghetti warehouse. You know? You can order any dish, it's got the same spaghetti. There's nothing Mexican about that. When along come in 1960 in California, they call themselves Mexican American Political Association. 3 bad words. People were scandalized. We came out of the closet. We outed. In Texas, we said, hey man, I know Californians, you know, you guys are too liberal, you can get away with it, but Texas is still tough, it's still rough. We're going to call ourselves the Political, one member, Association of Spanish-speaking organizations. But they still had the membership requirement of, you know, no women as full members early on, then they stopped very quickly. The women in CSO and the women in the Unity League and the women in the Comisión Femenil and some other things kicked butt right away. Said, no. That's going to do like in GF4. He no. Okay. So that ended real quick. But they had the 21-year-old thing, and they also, of course, wanted citizens también. This is at the height of when Eisenhower is conducting, well, right after Eisenhower was conducting the Operation Wetback. That's what it was called. Where Joseph Swing was just putting dots on a map and saying, go get me Mexican. We got to deport 1 million of them. And approximately 25 to 35% of all those people deported were U.S. citizens who looked Mexican and couldn't prove that they were U.S. citizens at that very moment, as you can't right now. God help us if the Migra came and raided us. You might even take some angles in the audience. If you ain't got your birth certificate, you might be a wet-back Canadian. Historically, I don't mean that just to make fun. Historically, there's been more wet-back Canadians than any other kind. They just look like the people, so they don't get asked. I didn't say that. John Paul Ehrlich wrote that in chapter 9 in his book, The Golden Door. So I assume he's correct. That's Mr. Zero Population Growth. But anyway, these Viva Kennedy clubs developed into a political association in MAPA. And do you know that they couldn't come together because they disagreed on Mexican American and Spanish speaking? So that's why it never became one. But at least they introduced that, you know, we would be able to register. That was the era of the poll tax. You know, they were still trying to integrate another extension, but adding on now electoral activity for the first time out in the open and trying to fit in, trying to get leverage, trying to get a little piece of the pie, system supporting, saying, look, we're voting for the lesser of two evils, okay? We're voting for the Democrats. And believe me, from that day forward, basically all of us were baptized Catholic and Democrat. And here we've been solidly in that camp. Until we get there now to the next group, the next generation. These are all generations, basically. If you plot it down by 20-year cycles, you see that that's true. And the reason that's true for young people in the audience, because I know you know about this, at least the practice side. You know, it takes about 20 years for you to reproduce yourself. Maybe because you're in college you have it, but all the ones who are not here, all you camaradas, you know, they're already having babies. So you know about the practice part of the making babies, you haven't had it. But in 20 years you basically reproduce yourselves, and that's why some people look at it this way of generations. Okay? The Garcia brothers, Chicano and Mario, written some books. The last one along that line is Rodolfo Rosales with the book called The Illusion of Inclusion. The politics in San Antonio, and he talks also about the middle class and the young people and so coming up. Well, from that 1 million by that time, now, you know, that we multiply, double ourselves approximately every 15 years. There's a bunch of us. Now that we've gotten this injection since 1986 of newcomers, we now are doubling in about 10 years. Like Houston, Texas doubles every 10 years. Houston, Texas will be majority Latino, and I mean that in the expansive sense. About 80% Mexican, and then cultural cousins. And we too are headed in that direction. We are about 64% at the moment of Mexican ancestry, but within, by 2030, we should be 80% of all will be people of Mexican ancestry. So we're headed in that direction, except that a lot of foreign-born, a lot of domestic-born, so we'll end with that when we get to addendums. But this is happening now in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, you get in all the excluded people. The ones who couldn't go to that hotel, that convention, the ones that can't afford those dues, the ones who were told, no, you can't join and vote and be president because you're female. The ones that said, no, you can't because you're below 18, you're under 21. All of these people then came together, particularly farm workers, youth, women, And that started the Chicano movement. Now, we came real close to saying we were separatists. We said the words, we didn't take action along those lines with a few exceptions. Some people did begin acting in a very separatist way. We started talking about Islam, we tried to find it on the map. And there's some people now that found it. There's some debate whether it's the Four Corners or whether it's up further up in Utah. According to Roberto Rodriguez and Priscilla Gonzalez, it's up in Utah, they got a map. For $4.99 you can buy a copy. Or you can read some other people talking about the Four Corners and then mass migration, that this is where it all came from. But we were trying to say that we recognized that we couldn't assimilate, and that integration was only limited to certain levels and certain segments of society, not completely, regardless of the civil rights laws, so that we were going to make do with the best we had. Besides, now that we had the beginning of critical mass, the numbers to do something with this, we were going to be a nation within a nation. So then we have this third etapa, this third strategy here, that juntos pero no revueltos, you know, aquí si somos la mayoría, we're going to be able to form our own nation within a nation like it was. Well, like I said, nobody really crossed over and said we're going to be separatists. We thought about it, we kind of wrote about it, we wrote poems, we had fantasies, we did slogans, we did posters, lots of merit badges, political buttons, things of that sort, but never really came out and said, we are separatists, we want a divorce. Now, many are saying, no, but we did say it. Well, see, I have a t-shirt. I'm 55 years old now. And I have a t-shirt that says, the older I get, the better I was. My stories are better now than they were before. So many of us are now saying, no, we really were. But then we also got introduced to many other isms. You know, there's always been Marxism and Leninism and Marxist-Leninism and Maoism and even Castroism. And we got all enamored with these things because they were alternatives. It wasn't so much that we were wanting to do that, it's just that we didn't want to do this because capitalism sucks. You know? Literally. All your resources, all your lifeblood, all your labor, and that's how they get richer and richer. And that has been the trend in our country. The richer are continuing to get richer, and the poor are getting poorer and more expansive. It's even hard now to hang on to be middle class. There's both of us to work, you know, and one of us got to have fringe benefits, the other one there's no health insurance. And if we look at our people, right, the new face of poverty is that Latina, particularly Puerto Ricans added to our milieu. That single mother with children, that's who the new poor in America is. And the largest number of poor people are children, and they're all our children. And all the indices, you know, the socioeconomic indicators, we're at the bottom of the list, and all those things. So these American isms haven't worked. Not for all of us, for some. And now we have in our society more foreign-born Mexicanos than we have locals. Now, there is no one like back in the early 1900s and late 1800s saying La República de San Joaquín, La República de Chama, La República de Rio Grande, and those kinds of organizations trying to fight the war and trying to reclaim the land. We don't have anybody today saying that. They're just acting it out. Now this to me is where we're going to get leadership and where we're going to get the next ism, irredentism, coming. And I'm going to show you some documents, but I got to put on my eyes, porque ya la bola has gotten to me too. For those of you that are young, it's la bola de años. You're the future. You're going to get to wear the and at the dollar store, you can get them for about $1.99. You go to Walgreens and go to an optometrist, you can pay up to $150. So your choice. These are Dollar General store. Yeah. This is just one of 19 Spanish language newspapers. I did say that correctly. One of 19 Spanish language newspapers just in Dallas, Fort Worth area. Esta es la estrella. En llegando dice, mexicanos forman aquí gran coalición. Okay, what is that coalición? Well, it's this coalición internacional de mexicanos en el exterior. International Coalition of Mexicans Abroad. CIME-ISMA. Okay? Now, Chicanos had everything to do with the beginning of all this stuff. You know, we started trying to have a link with Mexico back when, you know, in the 70s. And that was personally, that was a very crucifying era for me because everybody me la rayaron, left and right, from the left and from the right. And now, I'm the one excluded and everybody's in there. Boy, this is really good. Okay. All right, regardless of that personal agenda. The relationship began and we started demanding in Mexico protect Mexicanos here. Because we had that burden and we still have that burden. You know, like those Canadians that blend in, the Mexicanos that don't have documents blend in our community and, you know, they come in. And like our ancestors, that 1 million, they're going to marry and have babies here, and, you know, and they're going to stay. They ain't going to go back, even though they said they're going to go back. None of this Mexico mañana, aquí se quedan. They might go for Christmas. They'll be right back. Whether they go on their own or the migra takes them, they'll be right back. And I've noticed that in Albuquerque, you know, I have seen a notable difference. You can see now like Anteria, Xochimilco, you know, Tapiceria, California. That wasn't here in Albuquerque 15 years ago. So you have the beginnings of this, and I don't know that anyone is studying that, but you should. Because we started saying they should be responsible. Telling the Mexican president, you have to be accountable and responsible for these Chicanos. That ain't my job, guy. I'm going to be the head of the Raza Unida, but you know, I got another agenda. And you got to take care of these people, because we got to take care of this. Now you say that to a Mexican, a Chicano. Join the Chicano movement. Let's create a slam. Now they don't understand all this. They don't know the history. But they do ask you, very perceptive. I don't care if you're talking to a janitor or a lavaplatos. Dicen, ¿y por qué no me da la mitad? ¿Por qué no tenemos que traer democracia a México? ¿Por qué no todo México? See, they're saying that they know how to answer, and what they're talking about is irredendism, un México, not two. So we can't come together ideologically. Now there's a lot of other impediments, because we also then started saying that Mexicans here should have the right to vote. Well, last time around they had 8 ballot boxes in the border, and that's not going to happen. Mexico is not going to allow it. It failed in the Senate. It passed the House of Deputies in Mexico, and it failed in the Senate, and we couldn't get it done. So that's not going to happen this time around in July when we have the election. So the next thing we did, we said, well, then we want dual citizenship. Because when we met Mexicanos, and we have the longest tenure of all immigrant groups in deciding from first arrival when to seek citizenship. 26 years. 26 years to make up our mind that we're going to stay. Ya la abuela tuvo 17 huertos en España. Yo creo que sí porque quiere Medicaid. Takes a long time. So, if most people say no, es una traición a la patria. Traición a la patria. My father was the same way. When he was dying, he said he wanted to talk to me, and I thought he was going to tell me where the treasure was. You know what he told me? Prométeme, cabrón, que me entierran en México. What a fixation, right? You have relatives like that. So, you know, we can't work with them because son un estorbo y no cooperan. So we said, well then, let's have dual citizenship. And we got that. Now that was Chicano impulse. Now, this group, they're asking for representation in Congress from here. And do you know that they're seriously considering this as an alternative to letting them vote? The partidos políticos and the government of Mexico at this moment is predisposed to allowing representatives, very much like the Puerto Ricans that sit in our Congress as observers, very much like the DC, Washington DC delegate sits as an observer, and like many other countries also have representation from people abroad. They're seriously considered, and this will come to pass. There will be representatives from the United States representing Mexicans abroad in the Mexican Congress as part of the regular structure, making policy, looking at budgets, and so on. The issue of allocating the votes and the method of election is all problematic, but it's coming. I lied when I told you I was doing 25 just to please them, you know, but now I'm finished. Now, we now have come full circle. Here we are again, with now the potential of being the majority minority in many, many places, already are in New Mexico, and becoming majority. But in all of these organizations that we have had in the past, we have yet to have one with a plan to become the governors, with a plan to become a majority, with a group of roundtable leadership guiding the way with that vision and those goals and that timeline. And we are not only dismembered geographically in the two Mexicos, we are now spatially with two different kinds of people. Mexicanos and the children of Mexicanos generations back that are Chicanos or Latinos, Chicana, Latin Americans, Hispanic, or whatever you want to call yourself. We've got some two serious problems along those lines there. This ism, this irredendism, is the last one coming back again of trying to resolve the issue of what's going to happen to us in the future. The only wonderful news that I've got, because these are challenges and opportunities, is that we have the numbers to do whatever it is we want to do. whatever ism we pick, as long as there's great consensus and great marching orders, we can all hear the same drumbeat, you know, or get to the same page of music, we can do great symphony music. Thank you very much.
We're in a presidential campaign, and we hear on the news that Governor Bush has great Hispanic support in Texas. Can you talk about that and why is that so?
Yes, he has enjoyed the most support of anybody, including presidential candidates in the Chicano community that votes in Texas. He got about 39% last time around. And it's done just like anybody else that is seduced by television ads and personalities. You know, the message that you see in the medium becomes the graphic. He's been very astutely getting Chicano recording artists, I mean, that's what they're called today. This could be la onda music, the Chicano, regular norteño, but he's got the greats, you know, Emilio Navaira and all kinds of people going out there and pipering jingles and things. He's got Leonel Sosa, the most effective advertiser in the United States, the Chicano, doing all that stuff. He's got a very good number of advisors who tell him how to use rhetoric effectively. He speaks Spanish every chance he can. He poses a lot, abrazando Mexicanos and Mexican governors, and he says things that mean one thing but really talk about another reality. For example, 187 in California, he got up quickly in Texas and went around saying, it'll never happen in Texas. Well, no, it can't. We have no initiative or referendum. I mean, nobody except political science people or political silence people know that. So the man is very effective in his rhetoric, in his handlers. You know, he is an empty suit, you know, but he can remember cue cards and knows what to do. I mean, he really has great control. For example, you notice at the begining of the primaries, he was there with a little smirk, like, you know, I don't give a shit. I got 70 million. I can kill anybody. Can't even a chinguiza, and all of a sudden now, you know, notice he no little smirk. They told him, don't smirk. Okay. Listen. He was next, then you can be.
I just wondered, you know, the AFL-CIO has just called for the legalization of undocumented workers on this side of the border. I'm wondering, how's that going to play out? How's it going to affect the communities on both sides and for working people?
Well, that's going to be great. You know, labor unions, just like any other institution, didn't want us. Okay? Flat out. Even Cesar Chavez didn't want us back then. He was against Mexicans coming from Mexico for a long time. And it took us a long time to turn them around. Basically, what's turned out the labor unions around is that they've declined in membership, like many memberships. Like what I said about GF Forum, the American Legion is having a lot of trouble because other people are dying and they haven't recruited other people. So the young labor now is Chicano labor, Latino labor, particularly from Central America. So they have no option but to recruit us. The problem is that we're too young and we're not able to penetrate those levels of policy and budget and governing circles within the institutions unless we create our own unions. So I think it's going to be very, very good. Now, on the Mexican side, another thing that Chicanos pushed and the Mexicans are in it, do you know that Mexican workers here, because of our efforts, now have protection from their Mexican Social Security here? Yes?
I don't know if you've heard of the two ideas that are going on here. The land grant effort through Congress to restitution of the land, and also the idea that Professor Charles Medina has about moving out of Norte, where we will secede from the U.S. and together with the northern part of Mexico. Can you comment on both those ideas?
Well, the last one, just by what I read in the newspaper, and I'm anxious to visit with him because I haven't had a chance. I met him about 10, 15 minutes ago, well, before the talk. And all I have is Dallas Morning News articles. Dallas Morning News is a real right-wing newspaper, so I'd rather hear it from him. But my first question to him is going to be, all right, who are the contacts in Sonora and Chihuahua? Are they on the program? Because it's one idea to have a vision, and I'm sure this is not being critical of him. I need to talk with him. It's one thing to have a vision and see what possibly is happening. It's another thing for it to be a political agenda. For that, you got to have people, and you know, it's all things we talked about at the beginning. You know, the gut feeling and the troopers and the timeline and meetings. And what I said at the end about these people, they're going to butt up against those proposals, saying, no. We don't want to. We want all of it. So that's going to be a serious problem. The first part was what?
The land grant movement here.
Well, okay, Congress Congress and state legislatures forever have created commissions, they even publish reports telling you, who stole it when. But the reparations issue, you've used the word restitution. I don't know that they can make restitution other than monetary. So reparations is probably a better word. I'm not familiar with what's going on, that specifically. But they would be hard pressed. The African Americans are asking for about $8 trillion because of that 40 acres and a mule plus interest. Many of the Native American groups in East Texas, they've already won the lawsuit. And the Bayis in South Texas have also won their lawsuit, but they both have won the land claim. In East Texas, it's 1 million acres. In South Texas, it's about 86,000 acres, plus the royalties. And if that's going to go against Exxon, Exxon. I don't know how they're going to pay because they can't move anybody away, or the city of Las Vegas still is unadjudicated. There's no way in hell they're going to remove all those homesteads there. I don't really know come with the money. If the governor is threatening this budget now by June 1 because it's not enough money, can you imagine what he would do if he was faced with a couple of $1 trillion to make restitution? Okay.
We have a class coming in here.
Okay.
So maybe we can.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.